Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I want to do a follow-up video or two to my video on Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers with Hyperborea. And I really want to talk about what makes it different than first edition because I talked about right off the bat. One of the things that always gives me pause with retro clones is if they're too based on first edition, because I've kind of moved away from that and more towards a basic game because I like less rules. So when you're looking at this, how much is it going to be like that? How much is it going to be like that? So how complex is it going to be? So I'm not going to go over every single difference because there's a lot of them, and you should buy the game if you want to know all of them. But this video, the purpose of this is really kind of to kind of put aside any kind of concerns of somebody that either just doesn't like first edition or you don't want to get that complicated anymore, whatever. So I kind of I'm going to go over some of the highlights for me anyhow. First thing is in the ability score modifiers and the stats. It's funny actually looking at them. They're kind of like this weird amalgam of basic ability scores and first edition and OD&D. And what I mean by that is the 9 to 12 spot is just neutral. No real modifiers tend to happen there. And then from 13 to 14 you get some +1 modifiers to some abilities. If in 15 to 16, then you start to get some modifiers to some other abilities that might seem more important. Like to hit is a little bit more important than to damage, in terms of strength. Then 17 and 18 are handled differently. Those are the extreme ends. That's kind of first edition-y. And then you don't really get run into penalties usually until 7 to 8 you get some penalties, and then 4 to 6 you get a little more, and 3 of course you shouldn't have a character with an ability score modifier or ability score of 3 anyway. That's kind of neat. They're fairly symmetrical. What else? There's extra spells for intelligence and for wisdom, which is really kind of cool. There's a chance of to know spells, like whether you're going to learn the spell or not for clerics and magic users, which is kind of interesting. But that's symmetrical. There's no non-human classes or races available, and all the races like Atlanteans and Picts and Celts and Hyperboreans and all that stuff. They don't have any kind of special goodies. So it's not mechanical. Your height and your weight may be different, but that's about it. Atlanteans and Hyperboreans are a little bit, they're odd ducks, but the other races are fairly, nothing's really going to be different about them except hair color and all that junk. There's 5 alignments. There's not 9. There's chaotic evil. There's lawful evil. There's lawful good. There's chaotic good. There's neutral, and then that's about it. You can kind of lean one way or the other. So it's a 5 alignment system, which is kind of cool. Now, when it comes to things like weapons, first edition was just a monster with weapons. This isn't. There's no speed factors. There's weapon categories, I think it's called, or weapon types, whatever the hell they called it. And it's just how big the weapon is, and that really only comes into play every once in a while. There's no real weapons versus armor class. A couple weapons are better versus plate mail. That's about it. So all that kind of crazy stuff, all the various pole arms are missing. We don't have this big giant list of Bohemian ear spoons and whatnot, which are cool, but we don't have them. You have to worry about that sort of stuff. There's really some cool stuff with weapon skill and mastery and heroic fighting and super heroic fighting, but they made it really, really simple. So there's not these big giant weapon mastery as rules, and it's only really for the fighter. That they can have a couple extra weapons that are really good at, really super proficient at, and then depending on what level they are, they have double attacks versus opponents. First with 1 hit die or less, and then later on versus opponents with 2 hit dice or less. So kind of very OD&D-ish when this versus heroic and super heroic combat. The other classes, they simply have favored weapons. So if you're looking like first edition. That doesn't mean they can't use the other weapons. These are just the weapons they're good at right off the bat. And then they have to spend a slot later on at 4th level and 8th level, etc., to gain some proficiency in those other weapons. If they're not proficient in a weapon, they suffer a negative to hit bonus. But fighters are proficient in everything. You don't have those old rules where you get I don't know what it is, 4 weapons or something. That's missing, which is cool. I dig that. The thief skills are D12. A lot of other resolution things are D12. There's some D6 resolution as well, but things like the ranger skill is a lot of D12 type stuff, and there's other classes that use that, like the scout, which is kind of like a thief, thief ranger sorta. And let's see what else. There's a real simple fighting ability score for every class. There's a real simple casting ability and turning ability too. So you look at a character class, and right off the bat, you kind of know what they're good at. A lot of the other things, a lot of the weird, bizarre stuff about the classes in first edition, they're kind of missing. Kinda. What they did was they made it simpler in most cases. The monk is actually really cool. I liked what they did for him. He's not that awful class it was. The bard's actually pretty cool too, and has a real flavor. Like, why is this guy's music so enchanting? And it's a lot of it has to do with the setting. There's actually some cool mass combat stuff in there. The grappling and overbearing unarmed combat rules are not as horrible as they were in first edition. They're still not, to me, not awesome. I wish they were just opposed rolls, but still, they're cool. They're not the monsters that they used to be. Spell descriptions are a lot more open-ended, a little less codified for the most part. Some really cool spells in there, which I really dig. Some of them are first edition or unearthed arcana or whatever, but there's some other neat stuff in there. Things are presented, like I said, with a spell list, so it's a little bit easier to kind of navigate. Despite what class it is. It doesn't say, oh, go see cleric spell light. It just, there's one light spell and tells you what level you have to be for, any sorcerer class, because they're all sorcerers, which is kind of cool. So if you're a magic user, a cleric, or witch, or necromancer, or pyromancer, tells you what level you have to be to cast light, or what level spell it is for you in that case. I'm trying to think what else is in there. Off the bat, the monsters are presented in a lot simpler format. The magic items are presented about the same, but a little simpler, overall. But yeah, so it's a big, like, you look at these books and you start to get a little scared if you're me, because they're thick, but they're also a little bit smaller. Some great artwork in there too, but at the end of the day, it's not first edition. It's not. Oh, yeah. Well, where is he? Shoggoth. Yeah, as Jeffrey would say, it's informed by first edition and OD&D and all that kind of stuff. But it is not the unwieldy monster that first edition, was. And I love first edition. I played mostly. I just don't want to go back there. And this is not that. The other thing that's a little I forgot to mention that can be a little complicated. There's some combat rules in here in terms of, like, some extra more tactical stuff if you want to get tactical. It's not complicated. But there's some more stuff in there. So if you want to get crunchy and tactical, there's a lot of neat stuff in there to do so. Combat is actually, separated in. They actually really did a great job with the initiative system and making things a lot clearer in terms of, like, can you move, can you not move? And there's a two-phase combat system in here, which is really cool. I could see you using it or not using it, but it's presented in a way where they took a lot of the mystery and, like, what the hell did that mean? Out of first edition, and made it a lot more understandable. So I hope that helps. If you're a person that's a little put off by first edition, I would say, relax. It's not going to be that bad. This is a fantastic game worthy of your attention.